So now I would like to move on and introduce our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Michael Okun. And it is just a big honor to introduce Michael. And for those of you who do not know Michael, he's a world-renowned expert and a leading figure in the field of Parkinson's disease. And his contribution has been instrumental in shaping the therapeutic landscape for Parkinson's disease for the past 20 plus years, especially in the field of deep brain stimulation. I do remember that as an aspiring neurologist myself, I have the privilege of being mentored by Dr. Okun at the University of Florida in Gainesville. And during my time working side by side with Dr. Okun, I learned the words that shaped my career as a neurologist and what is the vision today in Neurology 1, which is that the patient is the center of everything that we do, right? And all the other healthcare providers were just in orbit around our patients, making sure that we provide the care that they deserve. Dr. Okun also transformed the University of Florida Center for Movement Disorders and Restoration and the Department of Neurology. And along with Dr. Kelly Food, he co-founded the Center for Movement Disorders and Neurorestoration, which is known today as the prestigious Fixel Institute. Dr. Okun's research is nothing short of revolutionary. He has been at the forefront of developing new advances in deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease, which is a groundbreaking therapy that has helped shape the lives of many people with Parkinson's. And his relentless pursuit and of innovation continues as he strives to bring new therapeutic options and improve the technology for those affected with Parkinson's disease and other neurological disorders. So with this, please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Okun to the stage. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be here and to be in Florida this morning and to be with you. And I just want to say that it is super inspiring to see this room and to see you all and to see the spirit that you bring. And it is palpable, you know, your enthusiasm and your inspiration, your stories, it's amazing. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of it. I also wanted to share with you that there are several heroes that are here, and Marty Miller, Parkinson, Central Florida. Round of applause for Marty Miller. I mean, come on, like, yes. This is a woman who has worked in the shadows and sometimes out of the shadows and doing walks and raising money from, you know, coffee all the way up to hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to make a difference for people with Parkinson's disease. And so you're a true hero, Marty. Let's give Marty another round of applause. She's amazing. So. And I also want to say, you know, how unbelievably grateful and how much gratitude I have for being here today. Ramon Rodriguez was the second fellow that we trained at the University of Florida. We've trained over 80, and he was on our faculty for many, many years. And not only is he one of the most tremendous neurologists that you will ever meet, but he's also one of the greatest people that you'll ever meet. And so round of applause for Dr. Rodriguez and everything. So Dr. Rodriguez and Dr. Benes and Jennifer Morguera and Eduardo and everyone have built, you know, something that can serve Central Florida, and I think it's really great. And I love how they named this event the Summit, you know, meaning it's time to bring together, you know, summit meaning to come together, you know. So demos, your people, to bring the people together. And so this morning, it's not only about Parkinson's disease, it's about inspiring you to think, you know, in a different way. inspiring you to think about how you can create and how you can, push the future forward. And so I'm going to take you through a journey here. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun, this morning, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you can create impact. And so let's see if this works here. I might need a little help with the slides. Maybe you can flip the slides here and then come home. Okay, so a number of years ago, we were privileged to write this book with Ray Dorsey, who's in Rochester, New York, and Boston Bloom, and Nijmegen in the Netherlands, and Todd Scherer, who at the time was at the Michael J. Fox Foundation as their CEO. He's still there now in another role, and we wanted to research and we wanted to understand what it takes to actually end a disease. Historically, I love history. Those of you that know me offline know that I love history. It is important to look at other examples of how this is done. And so this is, the research that went into this book, and we're working kind of on the next book. I don't know if I would call it exactly a sequel, but the research that went into this book really enlightened us in sort of trying to understand about what the journey is all about. So I don't know if you want to, there's somebody's holding the book up. If you want to take this and check the slides here, I can get it. And then maybe somebody could flip to the next slide for me. Okay, so one of the key elements here is thinking about, how we do this and placing the person with the disease in the center of the universe. And so one of the philosophies that we talk about a lot, and one of the philosophies that we move through each day, and every time that we see somebody with Parkinson, is we think you are the center, okay, and the families are the center, and all of the people around should be around the outside, should all be orbiting around. And so do you want me to give you this here? You want to check that? All right, and so thinking about the person as the center is really important. It was so important that we slipped it into the journal Lancet because we wanted to make sure people didn't forget, about this concept. But this is sort of the concept that we've been thinking about for over 20 years, okay? And next slide. So if we think about the sun, okay, the sun is something that can help us to light the way, can light our future. And then we put the people that are those that are journeying through the disease. And let's face it, we're all going to get diseases. I know, I'm sorry, I don't mean to start your breakfast off on a downer. But you know what? We're all going to accumulate things. It's part of life. It's part of our lifespan, okay? And so the sun can light the way. Okay, but the vision is going to pave the road. And each of you today, I would challenge all of you to think about what your vision is, what's your strategy, okay, for this. How are you going to walk the road? Lu Xun, a very famous Chinese philosopher, said, there were no roads until people walked on them. Okay, it's the same when you get the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. You must create that road forward, okay? So I ask you, okay, on your road, what's your why? Why? Why are you, on this journey? What are you going to learn sort of as you journey through Parkinson's disease? What is it that as you create your strategy, what is it that that makes you, want to face each day, face each challenge, and then understand that when you have a disease like Parkinson, it should be a livable disease. It should be something that you're thinking about. How can I get over that next hurdle? It's not that you can't get there. It's that you have to understand that there's going to be some challenges along the way. And we all course through life with different challenges. We all have to think through how each of these are going to light the way. And you look here, look at this video here. You probably know who this guy is. This is a 1966 video, okay? Watch the legs on this guy, okay? Why Why is it, okay, why is it that the legs and the coordination between the two sides, and he's trying to teach him how to box here. He's trying to say, come on, I'll teach you, come with me on this journey. Why is it that when Parkinson gets into his brain, why do the legs, not move like they did before? Why is the change, okay? And so can we flip to the next slide? So as we think through, all of the paths that we can have, all of the choices that we have, I want you to remember, I want you to keep one thing in mind. So this guy with the hat right here, I want you to keep one thing in mind. Life is multiple choice. Life is multiple choice. You get to choose. You get to choose. So the title today that we're talking about is Creating Your Impact. You choose. You choose how you want to create your impact, okay? And as we think through that, it's important for each of you individually to remember that as you create impact, you have to have strategy, okay? And when I talk about strategy, I tell a story about my son, Jack, okay? When Jack was in kindergarten or first grade, he began to play a game called chess, okay? And I'm not a bad chess player, but he would say, come on, Dad, let's play chess before bedtime, okay? And as we were, coursing through those bedtime rituals of chess, what Jack said was he would sit with me and he would play the game. And one night we were playing together and he had beaten me 2 times. He was on the verge of beating me 3 times in a row. And he stopped. This is like a first grader. And he said, Dad, you know what your problem is? And I said, no, Jack, what's my problem, He said, Dad, you don't have a plan. You don't have a plan. And I sit down and against this, and I think to myself, the first grader says this, is very profound, okay? So I ask each of you, as you're trying to create impact, what is your plan? Do you have a plan, okay? It's a very important question, okay? And so maybe we can play this clip here. So I wanted to show you a couple of things. And what movie is this from? Who can tell me? Awakenings, okay, right? And this is post-encephalitic Parkinson disease. A lot of these people got Parkinson after the flu. That's not the most common way to get Parkinson, but it is a potential way. And you see, as the Dr. Robin Williams is teaching, okay, just like Dr. Rodriguez teaches the Central Florida people, and he goes, you see this person transform from completely transfixed, completely frozen to be able to move. So the paradoxical movements that you see in Parkinson are quite unique. The response to dopamine they gave, these folks who had flu, and many of you are on dopamine, quite unique. This is unique, okay? This disease is the most common disease now, neurological dysfunction that we have. It's not stroke, it's not brain tumors. The number one fastest growing problem, I wouldn't say a problem, opportunity, is Parkinson's disease. It's actually growing faster than Alzheimer's disease, okay? And next slide. So if we look and you look at these folks and you say to yourself, why? Okay, why? And how can we create opportunities? We're talking about creating opportunities and creating impact. Many folks with Parkinson will, as they approach doorways or areas that are smaller, they might see the world as smaller than it is. They might freeze up. Look at this guy from the Nijmegen in the Netherlands. This is a video from my friend Bastian Bloem, one of the co-authors of the book. He can't walk, he's freezing, they put him on a bicycle. Bam, he's off. The paradoxical, the unbelievable transition from completely frozen to being able to ride the bike. So 2 things happened. This video went viral in the New England Journal. Schneiders and Bloom published this. And so lots of people ask the question, why? Okay, so it's a very, why is it? Okay. And then second, they ask, why does he not have a helmet on, in this video, okay? Turns out that in the Netherlands, it's not actually, illegal to drive a bike without a helmet. And of course, many people bike if not most people. You'll see tons of bikers there. Okay, next slide. So when we think about Parkinson, we have to think about, the growth when we're thinking about the journey. And back in 2013, we had written this book with the foundation called 10 Secrets to a Happier Life. It had this kind of runaway life to it. And it taught me a lot of lessons personally. One of the lessons it taught me is we had penned hundreds and hundreds of papers in my research lab over the years. More people read that book than anything that I ever wrote in research, okay? Second thing it taught me was we talked about 10 things we thought were like basic things that everybody would know with Parkinson. And we had seen people referred in, from all over the world, every continent except for Antarctica. And we realized we should never assume what people know and what they don't know. So each of you here, when you make your strategy, make sure you know all of these little things and make sure you don't assume that your doctors or the experts have told you everything that could be all the things you're gonna need to make it on the journey, okay? Dr. Rodriguez, for those of you that know, he's kind of an expert in travel too. So if you need to know about a travel destination, he can offer you all the tips. He's like the points guy of that. But in Parkinson, same way. He's also got all the tips that are gonna help you to succeed. It's just like the points guy in travel, okay? And so next slide. So when we think about how big the challenge is, Parkinson is now growing faster than any other neurological disorder, faster than Alzheimer's disease. You can find these graphs anywhere, okay? Many of us have sat on committees with World Health Organization. Ray Dorsey sits on the global disease burden, things. This is just a truth, okay? And next slide. And when we think about this, we have to think about, why do we care? Well, 1 in 15 of you are gonna end up getting Parkinson's disease in a lifetime, okay? And that number is gonna increase as we live longer. And guess what? We're living longer and longer. We lost a little bit of lifespan during the pandemic. That was the first time the lifespan thing went down for a couple of years, and now it's coming back up. One of the greatest innovations of the world was the doubling of the lifespan. Okay, next slide. So when we think about this growth, we have to think about, my gosh, alarm bells, Parkinson is gonna go up, okay? You don't have to be a researcher to interpret this slide made by Ray Dorsey, which appeared in that book, okay? This is crazy. It's gonna more than double by 2040, and it's gonna keep going, okay? And next slide. And so when we think about the lifespan doubling, okay, you can't explain that growth just by people getting older, okay? A lot of it is explained by that, but not all of it. So what else is going on here when we think about, Parkinson on your journey? Why are more people getting Parkinson? Why? Okay, we should be asking that question as to why, okay? Now, when we think about what's the path forward, okay, and asking that, when we were researching through that book, we sort of, took all of our notes and our napkins and our note cards and put it all together. And then at some point it became obvious, okay, that there is a formula here. And the formula spells the word PACT: prevent, advocate, care, development of treatments, okay? This is a picture of the White House campaign. So many of you participated here in Central Florida. We sent tens of thousands of cards to the White House, okay, after the book. And all the proceeds for the book and the signing and everything all went to charity. And we sent these out to say, we need to advocate, okay, for things. We need to increase the funding by 10 times in Parkinson. The funnel's not big enough. We're fighting each other for not enough dollars, okay? We need to ban certain chemicals and pesticides like paraquat, okay? And we need to make telemedicine permanent. And we warned the White House, if you don't do it, it's gonna revert back. And guess what? It reverted back. So a lot of people aren't able to get that care, especially across state lines, okay? And next slide. Okay, so when we think about, how we're gonna make impact, these two guys, so that's Boss Bloom there on the left, it's Ray Dorsey there on the right, and there's some difference here between the three of us. I don't know if you can pick this up, okay? But I think important to think about how we come together, okay, as a group, okay? Now, I want to point out that there is a national plan to end Parkinson. It's the End Parkinson's Disease Act. We're very proud of the fact that of the language there that it's ending Parkinson. This is your congressman here in the state of Florida, Gus Bilirakis. Gus has had 3 family members affected by Parkinson disease. It's very personal for him. Jennifer Wexter, who's also a representative from up north, recently got diagnosed with a form of Parkinson called progressive supranuclear palsy. The act is named for his brother, okay, and for Jennifer. And this is huge, and it actually passed the House 409 to like 7 or something like that. It's a very bipartisan, headed to the Senate and beginning to get a plan. We need a plan. We need a strategy, okay? All right. So you have to ask yourself as you're moving along, where do you live, okay? And when we ask ourselves, the P stands for prevent, okay? These are all Superfund sites. These are sites where there's been some sort of chemical into the environment. Look at them, okay? Look, okay? You can go online, you can see how close your favorite restaurant is to a Superfund site. Your favorite restaurant may be on a Superfund site. My favorite restaurant is on a Superfund site, okay? So you have to think about the environment and the environmental influences. Since the Industrial Revolution, we were able to automate all these things, but we also created bad water, bad air, other things. And could it be that one of the missing links is what we do on top of our genetics? Because here's a real hint. Okay, here's a hint for you in the red. Parkinson only affects genetically 15%, maybe 20% if you talk to the most aggressive neurogeneticist, okay? That's gonna leave like 80% of people that have something else. So it probably has something to do with our environment. We have to think about environment. We have to think about prevention, okay? So one of the studies that came out that you should be aware of, this is a study that was just published in a journal called JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association's neurology branch of that journal. This is over 300,000 service members who were at a camp called Camp Lejeune. Any of you have problems sleeping? If you have problems sleeping at night, you're gonna see those commercials on TV about Camp Lejeune, okay? Part of the Ending Parkinson Disease book is we kind of set off a bit of a rush to start to think about these environmental influences, okay? I'm not involved with any of these lawsuits, but I will tell you that if you were there, your risk was 70% higher of coming down with Parkinson, okay? And so when we try to prevent Parkinson, we have to ask ourselves, do you know the chemicals and pesticides potentially to avoid? Side in Latin means what? Pesticide. Have you ever thought about it? What does side mean? C-I-D-E. Killer. 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 Pesticide. Fungicide. Insecticide, okay? Meant to kill, okay? Just think about it. That's all I'm saying. Just think about it. Do you pay attention to where you live, where you spend time? Are you using air filters? Are you using apps? Are you thinking about things? Are we going to tell our next generation, that they should pay attention to where they live based on risk of disease? I bet we will, okay? And when we think about moving from prevention, we have to think about advocacy. And here you can see this is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, okay, with Eddie Cantor. Raise your hand if you know who Eddie Cantor is. All right, praise the Lord. We have people who know Eddie. Eddie Cantor ran a very famous radio show. And when you move along in a disease, it's very important to galvanize people, okay? And this galvanization was really important. When we did the White House campaign, we modeled it after this, okay, the book. And we even called it a Give a Dime campaign. But we learned something very important. Do you know if you mail a dime to the White House now, which is what they did, which is why they call it March of Dimes, and the guy Irving that ran the mailroom was overwhelmed by all of the dimes that came in. It's illegal now. They made it illegal to mail tender to the White House. So we couldn't do that exactly. But this was very effective, okay? Next slide. Okay, so if you think about advocacy and advocacy efforts, they can be very effective, okay? Look here on the left. They put a gigantic condom on Jesse Helms's house, okay? And it says, unsafe politics, Helms is deadlier than a virus, because he kept voting against HIV legislation. Once this went on his house, didn't block it anymore, okay? Just saying, nobody was killed or anything. This is a peaceful protest in front of the FDA for HIV and for AIDS, okay? Something to learn, okay? I've been in Parkinson's disease advocacy for over 2 decades. Marty's been in advocacy a long time, okay? We're still not at that inflection point. We still need to do better, okay? Have a bigger voice. HIV gets 10 times the amount of funding as Parkinson's disease, okay? Think about it, okay? Next slide. Okay, so if we think about the C, so we talked about prevent, advocate, we think about the C, that's care. And now we know that there are going to be 90,000 cases every year. We used to say a year ago, 1 case every 9 minutes. 1 case every 9 minutes. Do you know what it is now, this woman here in lavender? It's 1 every 6 minutes now. We underestimated, okay? That's crazy, okay? And when we think about that, and we think about, like the total burden here of these things, we have to think about how many people are going to be affected if we don't act, okay? And so when we think about looking for care, this is a quote from Jillian Lauren about looking for a sign. We have to teach each other what these signs are, and we're actually understanding better even signs of what causes Parkinson before you see a lot of the motor manifestations. People have used that word prodromal. You ever heard that word? It sounds like portentous, like in a movie, prodromal, but it's actually symptoms that occur before you get your Parkinson's disease. And so it's important that we understand the signs, okay? And remember what we don't have. My apologies to my friends at the Alzheimer's Association, but Parkinson is not Alzheimer's. Many more treatments for Parkinson's disease. And we have to think, when we're thinking about care, that there's something about Parkinson that's different. I showed you those videos, right? Okay? And timing is so important. Timing of your medications, regular timing, regular cueing, having your strategies. The right thing at the wrong time is the wrong thing. I can't think of a disease where timing is more important. And I can't think of a concept that isn't emphasized enough with folks who have Parkinson's. So think about that for part of your plan, okay? When you think about Parkinson, also remember that the time where you heard the words, "you have Parkinson's disease," 4 words, changed your life, okay, forever. Nobody ever forgets those words. Nobody ever forgets that moment. Yet we do such a poor job in delivering what that moment means. We do such a poor job in coordinating, what happens after that moment. But if you ask anybody in this room who's been through that, they remember, what happened. And that sets the tone for your strategy and for your journey. And so we run a free blog called ParkinsonSecrets.com. It was after the Parkinson's book came out way back in 2013. And we write every month. And Indu Subramanian, who's at UCLA, who's also an integrative medicine specialist. She writes with me. I write a lot of science. She writes a lot of the integrative medicine topics. And Johnny Atchison is our artist, and he's from the UK. And Johnny actually has Parkinson himself, is a doctor, and is an advocate, a practicing doctor, and he's a really gifted doctor. And so that are areas where you can pick up tips, but we need to teach people more about how important those 4 words are, okay? Now, a couple of tips here. Here's some quick blitz tips, okay? Every time you're at the Parkinson doctor, really important to have them pull you, stand behind you. This is the famous Stan Fawn, pulling on a person. When you pull a person back, you can check their balance, okay, and then get their risk for falling. If you have it done in Europe, they actually pull the hips, okay? And seeing how many steps you take, what your risks are. Fall prevention, super important, okay? Super important, on the big picture of your plan. A multivitamin every day. It's more than just health. And I'm not talking about the nutraceuticals of bags of everything. I'm talking about like 1 Centrum equivalent multivitamin. When you take dopamine, it depletes your biofactors, can lead to other things like neuropathies and other problems. You can also get overdosages of multivitamins. We've seen this many times. And folks, one multivitamin, it's really important if you're on dopamine. Don't forget that, okay? Now, when we think about Parkinson, how many of you have had a conversation with your neurologist about the dermatologist? Anybody? Raise your hand. Okay, we got to improve that. Parkinson, 2 times the risk of getting skin cancer, melanomas with Parkinson. Probably has something to do with the sweat, okay, that you have in Parkinson is different. Got to see a dermatologist at least once or twice a year, especially in Florida. You got to apply sunscreen, okay? Sunscreen usually lasts about 2 hours, so reapply every 2 hours. Wear hats like this guy. Like he's the perfect example, okay? All right, next slide. So you got to have a plan, okay? And it turns out, okay, that persons with Parkinson are going to go to the hospital more frequently than people that aren't, okay? 1 in every 3 people with Parkinson, at least once a year, will have an emergency room visit or a hospitalization. You got to be ready for that, okay? And we created this kit because I love this quote by Jared Kintz called, "I have a favorite cemetery I go to. It's really clean and the doctors are all really nice," okay? All right? Super important to remember that the hospital is not an awesome place. And so staying in the clinic with experts like this, super important, okay, to stay out of the hospital, and super important. We've written tons of papers on this with the Parkinson Foundation, you know, and then we had no success. You know, all these papers, all this research and everything. Then we created these kits, these free kits. You can even download them now off the Parkinson Foundation website, okay? And you gotta be ready and either have a kit or have all the components of it. And you have little rip-offs you can hand to the doctors or hand to the nurses, and it says, this is what you should do, because they don't know, okay, what to do. You're gonna be the big advocates. You're gonna save your own life when you go into the hospital. Super important. Once you've been in the hospital, the rate goes from 1 in 3 to 1 in 2 that you're going to return for some reason, okay? Partially age, but increase with Parkinson. Be ready. Have a plan, okay? Now, do you have a plan? Oh, are you getting a theme here? Am I hitting you too hard with this? Your strategy, your plan, okay? Do you have a plan for therapy and for exercise? Guess what? This guy right here in the green, it's not enough for you to say, yes, I exercise every day. That's not enough. We don't accept that, and we should not accept that. And that's probably what you would tell me if I asked, well, I exercise every day. You need to have a plan. You need to be queuing, and your plan needs to be adjusted by your either advanced practice provider, your clinician that's seeing you, your neurologist, your geriatrician, and your physical therapists, even if you use personal trainers. You need to have a plan that fits you, and your plan needs to change over time, okay? So it's not enough to just say, I exercise every day. And exercise is one of those keys that can be so powerful symptomatically for Parkinson's disease. Very powerful. Sometimes even more powerful than drug dealers like Dr. Bennis, okay? All right? I know it's hard to think of anybody more powerful than Dr. Bennis, but okay. How about nutrition? It's super important. It's becoming really important. But I use a term called nutritional overreach. It gets me in trouble with my colleagues, but I like to stir things up a little bit. And here's what I mean by nutritional overreach. You can buy all these books that tell you, do this diet, do this thing, do all of these things, and it's gonna, help your Parkinson's disease, okay? The reality is that we have some information about nutrition and Parkinson, but we don't know enough to be telling you exactly what to do, okay? So remember that. There's some information on the Mediterranean diet, for example. There's some information on the microbiome. There's some really good information about protein in a small number of people affecting medication absorption. All important. One day soon, you and everybody in here will get your microbiomes done. And you'll get your microbiome, and it will tell you the general composition of your gut bacteria. And we'll be able to say, you have Parkinson and you have this type of gut bacteria that puts you at risk for these things, and take these probiotics, which are going to change the course. If you take a random probiotic, you may be actually revving things up that are already revved up in your system. You may be improving it, you may be worsening it, and so thinking about this is going to change, but we're not quite there yet, okay? So be careful of the nutritional overreach. Make sure that you're eating a healthy diet. Make sure that you're exercising with a plan, 7,500 steps a day or more, okay? More important than depression. We used to say depression is the greatest unmet hurdle in Parkinson's disease. What's more important than depression? Demoralization. We didn't even think about this until recently. 1 in 6 people with Parkinson are gonna get demoralized. Think about it on your strategy and your journey. Why would you not get demoralized at some point if you have a progressive neurodegenerative disorder, even if it's livable? We need to recognize that. We need to be asking about that, and we need to be addressing it. Not just addressing depression and apathy, which are common. We need to address demoralization, and it's treatable, and it's something that we need to be thinking about what we can employ, what strategies we can employ for people. What's your magic sleep number, okay? How many hours of sleep do you need a night to be able to operate the next day? In practical terms, okay, we can do sleep studies, which are awesome. Sleep is abnormal in almost every person with Parkinson, okay? But if you don't sleep enough, you're gonna have a bad next day. And your next day isn't gonna last as long as many good hours. Focus on the sleep and think about what your sleep number is. Here's another tip for you. A lot of people stay in bed a long time, but that does not equal good sleep. Staying in bed a long time doesn't equal good sleep. Or, I sleep 9 hours a night. Most of the folks with Parkinson actually aren't sleeping well during the time that they are in bed. So a lot of us have these sensors, rings. I've probably got 3 of them on me. I got a ring, I got a watch, I've got a phone. Ways to look at that and look at the quality of the sleep and share that data with your clinicians and try to improve the number of good hours. I guarantee you, if you find your magic sleep number is 7 or 8 hours, if you get to 7 or 8 good hours of sleep, you're gonna do better, okay, the next day. Now, research. Never walk into a room like this and not talk about research, okay? They're not gonna let you walk out, okay? You wanna know what's the hope, okay? And so it's important that we think about it, and the development of treatments is super important. When we wrote the book, we learned some really, devastating facts to have to read and learn. We're underfunded in Parkinson, okay? $3 billion a year to HIV. That's prevented thousands, if not millions, of people from ever developing HIV and also converting that disease to something that is treatable. When I was an intern, we had people on the AIDS and HIV wards, and it was a horrible diagnosis and a horrible prognosis. That inflection point changed. It's driven by funding, driven by advocacy, driven by prevention. You're seeing a little bit of a strategy here. Parkinson gets about $200 million a year. We've got to increase that by 10 times or more. Make that funnel bigger. We shouldn't be fighting about, this is a bad project to fund. Our failures will drive our successes. We don't have enough failures. Let me say that again. We don't have enough failures in Parkinson to get to the inflection point that we need to get to, okay? So when we think about therapies, we think about all the different buckets, okay? I like to divide it into 3 buckets, okay? I make it simple. We've been doing this since the 2013 10 Secrets. When we started to talk to people, we realized we need to make our messages simple. So here's the simple message. Bucket number 1 are the therapies that we're developing that are the symptomatic therapies, the things that are gonna help you now, okay? All the tables out there are bucket number 1, okay, when you were walking around earlier. And it's important for us to develop those and to treat the people who need the help now today. Bucket number 2 is disease modifying, okay? That's the bucket where we talk about how we could slow the disease down, okay? If we could slow it down, okay, then it becomes somebody else's problem. Heart disease, cancer, whatever, right? And we buy you 10 or 20 years. Doesn't sound like a perfect strategy, Marty, but not a bad one, right? So the search for disease modifying, and we have not made enough progress there in the disease modification. We don't have a disease modifier, okay? Alzheimer's disease came up with its first disease modifier over the last year, okay? We're coming for you. We're coming next, okay? We're not there. And then there's the C bucket. okay? Cure. Everybody says there's going to be a cure in 5 years. Those of you that have been around as long as I have know that, that where's the cure? I'm waiting. Where is it? It's not here. It's supposed to be here in 5 years. I gave you all my money, okay? Parkinson is not one disease. Some people refer to it as Parkinson's diseases, okay? So getting to a cure is going to be tricky. But what we might do is change the C bucket to the P bucket. The P bucket, precision medicine. Thinking about, could we begin to knock off certain genes that are associated with that and then build on those successes, okay? So when we think about what do we have now, anybody have one of these pills in their pocket here today? There are a lot of these yellow pills, okay? Yellow dye number 5 or number 6, okay? This treatment's over 50 years old. Doesn't stop disease progression. Still the best treatment that we have. We've had revolutionary treatments like deep brain stimulation and other things after that, but still think about that, okay? Think about that, okay? When we think about all of the challenges that you're going to have to, kind of wade your way through in research, okay? Should I get a skin biopsy? Should I get a DAT scan, and all of these things? So we have begun to try to ferret through and take that information and make it more simple for you to understand. And so we put up these blog posts on Parkinson's Secrets about these things as these controversies come up. And so it's important for you to understand. If you have Parkinson's disease already, you're seeing one of these awesome docs, okay, or any doc or any general practitioner. Many people don't have access to even neurologists, by the way. Shocker of the morning, okay? Not even a Parkinson neurologist, but even neurologists, if we look at Medicare data. If you're responding to dopamine, you probably don't need a DAT scan or a skin biopsy, okay? It's not going to tell you anything that you don't know. These could be important for tracking disease progression and for staging and things like that, kind of along the road. And one of the things that you've heard about in the news, okay, that's important for you to understand is this idea of quaking, okay? Quaking and shaking, okay? Have anybody heard this new thing about the biologic classification of Parkinson and the Parkinson biomarker breakthrough? Anybody heard that before? Okay. So what was this thing? What was this thing that people are talking about? Well, actually, it's what I call in science fits and starts. Okay, so what happened is back in 2006, there was this disease called mad cow disease that was killing people really quickly with dementia. Anybody remember mad cow disease? So they took mad cow disease and they put them into test tubes and they would shake them up and they would put markers in there with them and they would shake this up for 20 hours. They would shake and quake this and they were able to show whether or not they could infect other markers that they put in that test tube with the mad cow disease. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is the proper name for that. And they were able to kind of develop this test to show quickly if you had this, okay? Turns out that the way Parkinson spreads in the brain is very similar to the way that those diseases, which are called prion diseases. And so from 2006 forward, a whole bunch of investigators have been working on this problem, and they started to put the Parkinson's proteins into test tubes and put markers in them, shake it for 20 hours, man. Imagine shaking something, put it in there for like 20 hours, they shake it and they get it to separate out, and then you can tell if you have what's called synuclein, which is the Parkinson protein. Okay, it makes up something called the Lewy body. Frederick Lewy was a neurologist, if you've ever heard that term, Lewy body. And it's a marker of Parkinson. But not everybody with Parkinson has synuclein, most people do, okay? And so this has set off kind of a revolution where in fits and starts we figured this out, but at some point all the investigators came together and said, boom, we're here, we have enough information, and so now we're starting to measure this. It's going to be important potentially for clinical trials, and maybe one day if we can get it into blood tests and things, it might be important for diagnosis in developing nations and around the world. We're not there yet, okay? But just so you know, like that's what people are talking about, like in plain language, okay? What's coming? This, synuclein seeding, okay, that means like how the bad Parkinson protein seeds or spreads, like you plant a seed in the ground when you hear that and it grows up like a tree. Could it be good for drug development? Could it be good or bad if you do or don't have the symptoms of disease? Maybe you're never going to develop the disease. Is it going to help us to classify it, stage it, talk to each other, doctors talk to each other? And so there's a whole bunch of questions about how this is going to affect research, how it's going to affect care, how it's going to affect how we understand the disease. We're not there yet, okay? So nobody jump up out of their seat and say we're there yet, but this could help drive some new therapies down the road, okay? I wanted to blitz through a couple of therapies you may have heard about and maybe wondering about. There's on NBC, on the Today Show, you may have seen the glove, the vibrating glove, and it's cool, right? You put these gloves on and your Parkinson's symptoms get better, okay? This actually has history going all the way back to a famous neurologist called Charcot. And Charcot would see all these people from all over the world. They would get out of the carriage or get out of the train, and they had been shaken, from remember, roads weren't quite as what they are now. I know people complain about potholes now, but there were a lot of potholes before. They would get out, and their tremors and things would be better. So they actually designed, way back in the 1800s, vibratory helmets, vibratory devices, all of these, cool things. And so there is a history of this. I would wait, guys. There's no control subjects on this. This therapy has been around for a while, vibrating, people. What is cool is when you vibrate things, oscillations change in the brain, so there's something to it. But we need to wait for a study that has controls, okay? And so we write about this in the blog, post. How about cough syrups? Raise your hand if you've heard about cough syrups for Parkinson's disease. Anybody? Okay, so big in Europe. Okay, there's a guy named Anthony Shapira who works at the University College in London at Queen Square, and there is a type of Parkinson called GBA Parkinson. It's one of the most common genetic causes of Parkinson, and there's this really long name enzyme, glucocerebrosidase, and you don't need to know that, but what happens is when you take this cough syrup called Ambroxol, it changes kind of the levels of this, and this could be important to modulating the pathway in Parkinson. And they had some good information in a study that came out in JAMA Neurology, very small study, and the Parkinson Trust is actually going to try it. They're trying it right now in Europe in people with GBA mutations and people without. So the question is maybe it will work, maybe it won't. However, the question is will some of these therapies that we aim at genetic disorders actually apply to other disorders, and could they be put together in combination? Too soon. Don't go get cough syrup after this, okay? Like, nobody go to the thing and get cough syrup. There's a lot of reasons why not to do that, okay? But my apologies to Dr. Rodriguez and Dr. Benes if you all show up, drinking lots of cough syrup and they've got to take you off of it. Don't do that, okay? All right. So there are many types of research, and we think about research in Parkinson. People are always thinking about the cure, they're thinking about, blood, and they're thinking about, but it turns out we need to understand the imaging. We need to understand how to put devices in the brain. We need to understand how to stimulate from outside the brain. We need to have psychologists that are looking at all the pathways and all the networks. And so I just remind you, when we think about prevent, advocate, care, and treat, just remember, there are a lot of areas of research. And there's a lot of biology we don't understand. And so if you think we understand the biology, you're wrong, okay? You might say that you understand it to get a big grant, okay, from like the National Institutes of Health. But if we were right, then all of these people doing all these clinical trials would have already solved it by now. We have to understand the disease in order to develop the treatments. And so it's really important to support these things and volunteer for all of the projects and helping to understand the diseases. So what's on the horizon? You're going to see targeting of specific genes. You're going to see things like DBS, neuromodulation, moving into smarter things. That's what we've done in my lab for many years, like try to eavesdrop and understand the conversations the brain is having and drive them in different ways and respond in different ways. There's going to be new drugs, and there's going to be repurposed drugs, whether they're anti-malarial drugs or drugs used for other things or cough syrups and things. There might be things that are on the shelf now that in combination are going to make a difference. And there's going to be cocktails. Who here likes a cocktail? You like a cocktail? Raise your hand if you like a cocktail before dinner. Okay, be careful. Are you taking notes here, Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Benes? Okay, all right. Do you see who raised their hand? It turns out that it's probably not going to be one drug or one approach or one thing. We're going to need to be thinking, larger, like you see in cancers, where people are putting together multiple combinations of things. So super important to think about when we repurpose, thinking about, how that can happen. The smart implant, era is here. We've been working on this in our lab for many years, many researchers working on this, being able to take the information off of the brain, off of the animals, and now the big animals, us, and be able to decode that and have the devices change depending on the symptoms that you see. Next slide. And here I just show you, this is just a single subject in a National Institutes of Health study here who happens to have a disease called tics. Does anybody have anybody in their family with tics? Raise your hand here. It's a very common, movement disorder. It's one that we've studied in our lab for 20 years. And as she tics, very many years ago, we were able to use the brain signals. It looks like an EKG in the upper right corner there, kind of going along, right? We can use those brain signals to predict when she's going to tic and then to develop therapies. We actually did this before we did Parkinson therapy. So sometimes you learn things and you apply it to the next, therapies, to tremors, to Parkinson, to other things. And so understanding the language of the brain is super, super important, okay? What about focused ultrasound? What's all the fuss? Focused ultrasound, what's all the fuss? It's a kind of a creative title. What's all the fuss about with focused ultrasound? Well, you can make a lesion from outside the brain, okay, with focused ultrasound. And so we've actually been making lesions in the brain called pallidotomies and thalamotomies for many years. And actually, here's a little secret for you. If you put the lesion in the right place, it's actually a very good therapy. Okay, we've done this even before deep brain stimulation. You may not be able to modulate it or change it or anything, but it can be a very effective therapy if done well, okay? If you do it on two sides of the brain, people can end up with side effects. And so understanding how to do it on two sides of the brain safely is important, is a challenge for the field. And then DBS came along and has all these, things that go with deep brain stimulation, with programming and reversibility. But being able to do something from outside the brain to inside the brain is a nice advance that was actually brought into the literature in 1958. 1958. You're a neurosurgeon, right? 1958. Okay, so it's been around for a while, but in fits and starts, we figure out how to use it better. And so coming from outside the brain, we're getting better at it. And what's cool is you can actually put these sound waves into the brain. And one of the other cool things is look at this little cartoon here, okay? When you inject bubbles into somebody's bloodstream, okay, and then you push these sound waves in at very low frequency, not very fast, not fast. I say not fast, less than 60 times a second, but that's pretty slow on brain speed, okay? And what happens is the bubbles get bigger, and this is a blood vessel, and it opens up these little gaps between the blood vessels, and then we can use that to get things across this barrier called the blood-brain barrier. And so a lot of researchers are using this in the lab. There's even been a few human studies of could this be used as a delivery technique. So, lots of creative ways to think about where the research is going. So stimulating from outside the brain, this was developed by Ed Boyden and Nir Grossman, a technique called temporal interference. Temporal interference hasn't made it yet to humans in large scale because it's hard to scale down. But the idea is that Ed and Nir said, why can't we push currents from outside the brain, okay, not make a hole in the brain? And it's like, has anybody seen the movie Ghostbusters? Remember in Ghostbusters where they say, don't cross the streams, okay? This is the therapy where you say, cross the streams. You push two currents from outside the brain, and where they cross, okay, where they cross, it's a difference in the frequency, how fast it's coming, will stimulate deep to the brain without having to go in. So you can do this from the outside. And so people have been looking at this, and it's a technique called temporal interference. What do you need to remember? It's from outside the brain, so you don't need a brain surgery to get there. And could it get to these small areas, and could it help us to eliminate the need for some of these more invasive neurosurgeries one day? It's pretty interesting, okay? Also, we think about optogenetics, that's adding light to genes. We do this mostly in animals to see how circuits work on a nanosecond. Nanosecond, that's really fast, guys. Level. Not so easy to put it into humans, but it has helped us to derive potential targets for drugs and for other therapies. We can inject these things called nanoparticles, and sometimes they can be magnetic or they can be activated by heat and change the way that they're going to interact with receptors in the brain, okay? And so you can see this is Ahmad El-Kouzi. He's one of our fellows. Dr. Rodriguez was fellow number 2. He's probably like fellow number 50, you know, so if you get a sense. But he's in Southern Illinois, great guy. It's an article he wrote about upregulating and using nanoparticles. I want to tell you, there's a lot of hope, a lot of interesting things that are going on. So next generation, we may add magnets, we may add thermal, we may be injecting things in, we may be pushing things across the blood-brain barrier. So some very interesting things that are coming, you know, down the pipe. And finally, vaccines, okay? And you hear about vaccines in cancers, you hear about vaccines in infectious diseases, but there's also talk of vaccines in Parkinson for many years, okay? And the idea is that the immune system plays a role in Parkinson disease, and so could we use the immune system itself to inject and then remove some of these bad proteins on the brain, okay? And, you know, so William Foch very famously said, vaccines are the tugboat of preventative health. The issue with vaccines and neuroimmunological things in Alzheimer's and in Parkinson is, will you scrub the brain clean of the protein but still have the disease, but a clean brain and the disease? Or will it affect the symptoms? Or will it slow it down, okay? So these are the questions that are gonna face the field here. And finally, I just end by saying biomarkers, coming back to biomarkers, okay? We talk about, you know, kind of this breakthrough biomarker, you know, idea in the blood. There are lots of studies. This is one by David Valancourt looking at imaging. What if we could just use a regular MRI to track the disease? Now, guess what? Once you're diagnosed with the disease, big secret, cat's out of the bag, you have Parkinson, okay? But what's even more important is, as your Parkinson progresses, if we can develop a way to measure that, okay, better than little scales that are 0 to 4, actually measure that, we can then put lots of drugs and lots of therapies through clinical trials instead of with thousands of people, with hundreds of people. And so when you think about a biomarker, I want you to think about like how that could have impact in the field, not just for diagnosis. Diagnosis would be great, particularly in underdeveloped nations and in other places that don't have access to have a quick blood test, but tracking progression, super, super important. So these are just the grants that support my work from the National Institutes of Health. You're all taxpayers, hopefully, here in the room, so thank you for paying your taxes. You've supported my work and the work of what we've been doing for a couple of decades. And thank you for the invitation to speak. It's an honor to be here, and this is a great summit, and thank you to Neurology One. Thank you.
Another big round of applause for Dr. Michael Okun. Wonderful presentation, very insightful, informative. Thank you for providing so much insight.
Thank you very much.